It's time for another coin game, in this case Pendragon. Again, I picked this up in the recent GMT fall, not all that recent fall sale. It's good to have those back, at least in terms of for GMT getting games into my hands. But anyway, this is one, like with Falling Sky over there, that I was a little hesitant to touch at full price, simply because, or pre-order price, more likely, because I've got kind of a fatigue that built up out of the early coin games. And what I found with Falling Sky was something very different, and this one too appears to be something very different. For one thing, it's not covering a counterinsurgency. Neither of the two games is, in any sense of the word. Falling Sky had certain issues in my head with the believability of the deterministic combat. One nice thing with this is there's one hell of a set of designer notes. The designer of this one actually tried to do a non-deterministic combat system, and it sort of has it, but it has something along those lines, which you can see. Look, there's dice, lots of dice, weird dice. Well, they don't actually play into the combat system directly, but they feed into it, and that we'll see how that works, whether or not it's sufficient, etc. The real problem there is, in a counterinsurgency type situation, you have almost a bookkeeping type aspect to, if I throw forces in and do this kind of pacification, I'm going to have kind of an expected result, which covers over the entire region over a period of time. In Falling Sky, that didn't really come out believable to me, because you have these massive battles between the Celts and the Romans, and those kind of massive battles could conceivably hinge on something where you could not just predict what your losses are. This was a little different, because here the representation is that of the fall, essentially, of Roman Britain over a large period of time, a huge period of time. I don't know how long the turns are supposed to be, but I'm not sure that a single battle in this represents a battle. I'm not sure I really need a dice implementation. And in those fantastic designer notes, they kind of went over why they pulled back from that, which was coin players don't like it. They like the deterministic being able to count and know exactly what you're going to get when you take your turn. So you make a choice based on, the card that's up there, whether or not you're going to go. But when you make the decision to go, you almost know to a T exactly what's going to happen. Now, this doesn't provide that, and I'm not sure what that's going to mean. I haven't set everything up, it seems. First of all, we got these. I'm not sure what these other discs are for, though. I'm presuming some of them probably sit on here, but I wasn't given any instructions to set them up. I read through the rules, and my intention was to do what I did with Falling Sky, which was kind of play a little bit of it, maybe a whole scenario, and then come back and play it again on video, because coin games are very difficult to grasp beyond the first time you face one, it's like facing a whole new kind of game. Once you've seen the coin system a couple of times or whatever, you're used to that basic mechanism for the coin system, but you got no idea what to do, because it's all ruled basically by the actions that you can do. And then, of course, there's the event cards, or the event options that come up through them. But those options, you can read them, and I don't mind that they're kind of secret, in the sense that you may not get what you expect or whatever. But the main thing is that you're reading through your set of charts and figuring out what you can do. Now, let's see what we got here. This is all bot stuff, I think. Get rid of that. I'm not going to play with bots, and I'm not going to go into them. Sets of these. A huge playbook. Huge. A lot of it, like I said, is the designer's notes. What's this? More bots. This is some sequence of play stuff. I probably have more charts than I need in each case, more bot stuff. So that's probably about what I need to play the game. Whole bunch of high quality paper that I don't need because I'm doing it solo, but it's it's always good that everybody's got one. This particular one is kind of interesting because, and this was the one that I wanted the most out of, I avoided the American Revolution one. I went with Falling Sky in this, but this was the one that I was almost certainly going to get at some point or another, just for the topic. And I think it's got more cross genre appeal than most of the coin games. Falling Sky, hey, that's going to attract the non-modern wargamer type more. Same thing with the I can't remember the American Liberty or Death. I don't own it, so it's harder for me to remember. But this one, the title even, Pendragon, that raises such thoughts. Unfortunately, this is not necessarily the best coin to start with. It's a little heavy. It's definitely on the heavier side, heavier than Falling Sky. I don't know if it's where it compares to like Fire in the Lake, which was pretty heavy, if I recall correctly. I only played it once. I should be getting it to the table again. I like Vietnam a lot. Okay. And this one has, let's take a look at some of the pieces. We've already looked at some of the charts. You got your big deck of cards already sorted. And like with all the coin games, there's some sort of end of period cards that go in. They're a little different. They serve other purposes than they do in, say, your modern counterinsurgencies, because they're marking the major passage of time in England. Now, they're not fixed, which is to say there's 6 decks in the Grand Campaign basically stacked on top of each other, with the bottom 5 cards. One of them is your epic card. But the first 3 decks that we're going to hit use 3 out of 4 early epic cards, I believe. And the second set of 6 decks, or the second set of 3 decks, each have one of 3 late epic cards. So there's going to be a mystery epic missing. I have not studied the epic cards at all. So another thing players have, and again, I haven't looked at all the games. I also haven't looked at Cuba Libre. But this to me is innovative. Now, some of them have, your little special abilities or whatever that maybe you can trigger off or whatever. But these guys have cards that you can swap in place of the current card. Basically, you don't like the current card, you can trump it and play, I don't remember what it's called. It's like a preemptive event or something like that. Each player has one of these in the Grand Campaign. They may have already used them in some of the later scenarios, and in the short early scenario, they don't have them available to use. Each player also has an area to keep their tokens and stuff. This time it's on the map. It's a fairly large map. Couldn't lay it the way maybe I'd want to, but I'm okay with this. For pieces, you have your kind of military pieces. You have settlement type things. For the dukes, it's going to be a fortification. For the civitas, it's a little different. they have two types of settlement. They have towns and hill forts, and they have them both at the beginning of the game. They also have two types of troops. They have their militia, which they start with, and then they have the comitatus or whatever, which really is more of a formalized military. Like most coin games, there's sort of two establishment players, whatever. In this case, you have the dukes, which starts out as the Roman military, and you have the civitates, who start out as kind of the Roman civil government, essentially, in Britain. And the other two players are the Picts and the Saxons, who both play fairly similarly. They are going to be interested in raiding, as well as, to some extent, settlement, especially for the Saxons, less so for the Picts. And so instead of just regular military units, they also have these weird little raiders, who are kind of a pain to count out and grab just because of the shape. We have one more thing that's kind of weird. I'm not going to go into a lot of basic coin stuff here. I'm assuming a familiarity with coin, which is, again, I can see people being drawn to this one who have never played another coin game before, but I'm warning you guys, go grab, Andean Abyss or Cuba Libre or one of the simpler ones. Get a shot at that before you take this one. I know this one interests you more, but it's got a lot going on in it. So one of the things that's here is this is, I don't know, treasure cubes, whatever. They can be taken from the provinces and carried around as plunder, and then they can be used in various ways to add to your own cash, as it were. Or, well, cash means different things for different people. In the case of the barbarians, it actually means more of a, I guess, prestige type of thing. And these are, at least one set of these should be on the board for that. And the others are probably extras, because as GMT has been doing with wooden pieces, they give you a whole fistful of like one extra of each wooden piece. I'm betting that there's one extra of each of those, and the others are probably meant to be tracked on here, but I don't know precisely where they should be, because got prestige. Yeah, I'm not sure what those are for. Like I said, I read the rules, but I forgot them. What else do you have? You have your sort of standard track or chart, or whatever you want to say, for handling, hey, who gets to go and what things they do. And that all looks exactly the same as it does in other coin games. Like in Falling Sky, and I think most of these, when one of the epic cards comes up, you go through a sequence of different things, sort of mechanical tasks that can end up ending the game, but they can do other things. You have this little chart here, which is going to determine kind of what state Britain's imperial government is in, and yeah, pretty much, and whether the government is run more by the military or more by the civil side of things. And so that starts out as Roman rule with the two splits, goes down to autonomy, which is after Rome more or less cuts the provinces and lets them run on their own. And finally, there's fragmentation. Fragmentation is significantly different in the sense that, like I was trying to say, but I don't think I spat out. In a lot of the coin games, you have you have a couple of factions that are on the establishment side. So you have like the government and the U.S. in Andean Abyss, if I recall correctly. You have U.S. forces and the Afghan government in a distant plain. Well, in this, you have the military side of the Romans and the civil side of the Romans, who are both kind of working together, but only one of them can win. And so they will fight each other at times as the Roman side of things. And then you have competing factions. You don't have, as you do in most of the modern era coin games, you don't have a criminal type player or a business type player. Everything here is kind of a military faction. And Falling Sky had the same situation where Falling Sky actually didn't really have a government ally. So you had the Roman player and you had a Gallic tribe that kind of is pro-Roman, but less so than in most of the games. And then you got various markers that are going to be kept on this overall track. You have population in each area. That's this number here. And that can change due to events and due to actions in the game. These are used to mark cards that are in effect. Okay. It is possible for the Romans to buy off barbarian forces and kind of use them as auxiliaries, etc. And that's the Federate. And so these get marked. If they're owned by the Duke's side or used by the Duke's side, they'll be using this side. And if they're used by the civil side, they'll be used like this. There's a danger in that because you might be pumping up and strengthening the Saxons or Picts. And then if you fail to pay them the wages that they demand, and those can be quite high, they will end up, it's automatic, it's not like the players get to demand them, they can end up just sort of turning into more barbarians inside your territory. At the beginning of the game, the entire territory is pro-Roman. Let's see, you got control markers, you got refugees. When an area starts getting denuded of population, refugees start plumping into the civilian area. Not here, but over here. These guys aren't actually available yet. Into the civilian area, and they allow you to resettle them somewhere else and increase population elsewhere, possibly. We talked about these cubes. These guys, I think the whites and grays are like the whites and blacks in most games. They're pawns you put down to indicate the commands, and I don't remember what they have. I'm trying to remember the term that's generally used, but here it's called feats, for things that you can do along with a command that give you kind of two different options, one off column A, one off column B, and you get a fortune cookie at the end. And then these are, again, duplicate pieces for this scoring markers that the two players have. Okay, and again, let's take a look at the rules, I guess, and the dice that I mentioned. Okay. These are the resource markers. I don't know. These should be on the board, and they should have been set up, but maybe they're just zeros, and that's what went wrong. What? I am not seeing any research. Oh, there they are. Yeah, they're not at zero. The Dux is at zero there. Scots have 6 prestige. Without any prestige, it's kind of hard for these guys to go. The Saxons have 10 prestige, and the Britons have 25 resources. Now, one interesting thing in this is that the Dux player can basically requisition civilian resources and use them as their own. These are not resources, I don't think. Wait, no, that's the prestige marker. I don't know. These are resources, so they're pure money. But these, which are not money, they're renown, are treated like money pretty much. So we don't have to worry too much about that differentiation. We'll just consider all those counters the money counters, not to be confused with these suckers. There's a few counters that there's duplicates of. Okay. Sequence of play is going to generally be your normal coin sequence of play. You make it. You're faced with a card. It has a sequence of different players, and if you're available to do an action, and you're first on the card. If you're the first person on the card who's available to do an action, you have the choice of taking one of these actions, or you can pass and you get 3 resources if you're Britons, and if you're barbarians, you get 1 renown. Britons being the red and the blue side. Okay. When an epic card comes up, we follow the epic sequence, which we'll worry about. Okay, let us look at the specific commands, at least to some extent here. So training, the goal there is to build the red cubes, the Duke's cavalry, and the Civitas militia from available forces, and you can also improve local prosperity. You select any forces that have a fort, which has to be a red stronghold. It's the red player, of course. Or Duke's control, which eventually has its own counter, but at the beginning of the game, it's just Britain control. They share control of areas. And, of course, in a limited command, you're only allowed to pick 1 space as normal. And then in each of those spaces, you can spend 3 resources and place up to 1 cavalry per fort. And if there's towns or hill fort, up to 2 militia. Then in up to 2 of the selected spaces with Duke's control or Britain control, and either fort or cavalry, you can pay 2 resources to add prosperity cubes equal to the current population. Okay, yeah, so you'd follow the population here. Now, the way the cubes are set at the beginning of the game is they're stacked on top of each other, and you'll remove from the top row first, and then when that's done, you remove from the lower row, and you fill the lower row first, and then you fill the top row. There's a correspondence. You're only allowed as many columns of cubes as the current population of the area. Population in all areas can go 1 higher than it starts the game with, which is why there's room in all these areas for another set of cubes. Once, I believe it's fragmentation takes place, but it may be when Roman rule goes away. I have to look that up. The top row goes away, and so the overall prosperity just decreases tremendously. I think it's at fragmentation. I could look it up, but okay. So that's one of the Duke's commands. One thing, initially, all of these are set in specific locations. Now, some of the locations have a black, some of them have a white. Don't remember the difference. I believe that you're not allowed to build towns in anything except the black labeled areas. But again, it's hard for me to hunt down all the rules references either before or during the video. So, if I catch that's wrong, I'll come back and tell you. The next one is March. March allows you to move cavalry and allied troops. You select any spaces with cavalry or red federate as an origin. You form marching groups as desired from the troops that began together in that space. And you can form multiple groups, but it only costs you the same cost per area. Each group has to have a cavalry or red federati, but you can bring blue federati, comitatus, and militia, as long as there's a red piece in there or a red controlled piece in there. And under certain special circumstances. Those special circumstances are you can't be in fragmentation, and the Civitas has to agree to allow their units to be marched. Now, I thought under military control you could just grab them, but apparently not. That's something else. It's, borrowing money, taking money from the Civitas depending on who has control, etc., that affects it. And we may have those spelled out here. There's always a lot of good play aids here. All casualties are available. Imperial taxation, +5 prestige, Duke's victory. No. We got Britain cooperation, but that's in both of these. So the specifics of who gets to pay for what are not spelled out there. They'll be spelled out somewhere else in the rulebook. Okay, so you're allowed to move your group together into an adjacent space, and then if you followed a road, as long as the road's maintained, the roads are always maintained by Roman rule. Once you drop down to autonomy, the military player has to pay to keep the roads up. Once you drop down to fragmentation, they're gone. Once they're gone forever, even if you somehow make it back up to Roman rule. Okay, so let's take a look at this. If you followed a maintained road on the first move, then you can continue into a space with Duke's control at the outset of the March campaign until into a further adjacent region, and so on. If you depart a maintained road or enter a space without a Duke's Britain control, you must stop there. Okay. Militia, however, are only allowed to move one space, regardless of the roads. And you can pick up additional units on the way and gather them, but you have to pay to move that space. But what's impressive about this is I believe you can pick up, I don't know, this isn't clear. It says under the same conditions as explained above, which may mean you need to have a red piece there to pick up a group, or it may be I've got a red piece in the group that's moving so I can pick things up. I'm not sure which way I would take that. Okay, and you mark these spaces using the pawns for the main action. You can also drop pieces off, and you can keep moving as long as Cav or Federati remain with the group. That's why I feel like you could probably pick up blue units on a march. And, you could take militia with you and drop them off one space further away because they can't move any further and stuff like that. The next ability they have is to intercept. This allows cavalry and Red Federati to move and immediately fight raiders. Okay, now think about this. If you're familiar with coin games, in most coin games, you're shifting your forces and preparing for some kind of combat action. And then you have to wait, and you probably see your enemy just fade away. That doesn't happen here. The interception ability allows you to do something that you can't even do in Falling Sky usually, which is you can march out and attack the enemy directly, but you're limited to only attacking their raiders. And you might get some local allies to help you. You select spaces with raiders and friendly control as your targets, and you select spaces with both cavalry and Red Federati and such control as the origins. The intercepting groups are formed as desired from Cav and Federati that have begin together. You pay 2 resources per origin space, and then you move each group together one by one, either into an adjacent space or exclusively along maintained roads, including origin and destination, and in both cases, only from, through, and to spaces that had friendly control. After all the movement, all Cav and Red Federati in each target space battle one barbarian faction which has raiders there. I think you're required to battle. Any civitas already present will fight with you unless fragmentation is in place. Yeah, they don't want the raiders. Okay. And then the final option is battle. This allows you to use the Duke's forces and possibly allies in order to fight the enemy. And here you're not forced to only fight raiders. You can fight regular war bands. And you gain prestige if the Dukes win, or restore local prosperity if you destroy the enemies containing plunder. You select any spaces with cavalry and Red Federati and enemy pieces. And then you'll handle the fight, and there's a battle procedure to handle that. Okay, next player is the Civitas. They're allowed to muster. They can place militia, comitates, hill forts, and or towns from available forces. You select spaces that have civitas pieces. You pay 2 resources to either put a militia per town or hill fort. Plus, if there's Briton control, you can place a militia per current population there. Plus, you can pay 1 wealth per unit to replace those with comitates, once they're available. Okay. Wealth is something different from resources. So I've got a pile of resources here. I track civitas wealth here. Basically, there's the capacity to turn resources into wealth, but wealth is more valuable than resources. Comitates are better fighters, though, than militia, so it's a big deal. But they're expensive. Okay. Let's see. And pay 2 wealth in addition to replace 2 militia or 1 hill fort and 1 militia. Let's read this again. Friendly? No. Place 1 militia. I haven't gotten there. Place 1 militia per current population there, plus pay 1 wealth in addition per unit to place comitates instead of militia. Or, if the friendly pieces outnumber the barbarians, you can replace a militia with a hill fort in a hill fort or town site, and or place 2 wealth, or pay 2 wealth, to replace 2 militia, or 1 hill fort and 1 militia, with a town in a vacant town site, which might have just replaced the hill fort that you removed. Now remember, hill forts can be in these white spaces. Towns can only be in the black spaces. And then also, well, these are black spaces there in the cities. I don't see control markers for the cities, and maybe there should be one. There's no box for them, but I don't know. There are counters that could fill that out, and all the dark blue counters are on the board, so whatever. Okay. You can't place the comitates until they're available. March moves civitates and allied troops. You select a space with comitates, militia, or blue federati as origins. Form marching groups. If they start together in a space, they can form multiple groups. They must include at least 1 of the blue-controlled pieces. And red federati and cavalry can be included if you're not in fragmentation. And if the Duke agrees, the Duke's faction agrees to follow that route of march entirely as spelled out by the blue player. It's going to cost 2 resources per origin space, and you move the groups either to an adjacent space, and then if desired, and if the preceding move followed a maintained road, this is the same, into a space with Briton control. Followed a maintained road, this parentheses is screwing me up, followed a maintained road into a Briton control space, then it can keep going along the maintained road into Briton control spaces. But if it leaves the road, or if it hits a non-Briton controlled, it stops. Militia can still only go 1 space. You can pick things up under the same conductions. This is the same as before. And you pay things off, you can drop off. Trade. Trading allows the civitates to collect resources outside the epic rounds and regain prosperity. You select any spaces with towns. You select just 1 space if this is a limited command. Towns are these pale blue fortified looking things. The pale blue castles are towns. Okay. For each selected space, and everything's, of course, they select 1 space on limited campaigns. For each selected space, you add 1 Briton resource for each town there. And then up to 2 selected resources with Briton control, you can pay 1 resource per space to add prosperity cubes, the little gold cubes, that's what they're called, up to equal to the current population. And let's see. They seem to say you can only Add one resource. No, that's not what it's saying. It's just a note that's meant to confuse people who read it. Battle enables the civitates and possible allied forces to destroy enemies and gain wealth and restore local prosperity if they destroy the enemy's controlling plunder. You select a space with blue pieces and enemy pieces if it's, and then you will fight using the battle procedure. I'm running out of battery power, so I'm going to pause here. And we'll work our way through it. It's a fairly different. I mean, we always have to work through all the different actions, but we've got more than that. We've got these things. We've got a lot of special rules, like the Imperium being able, what is the government like? It's a much more complex coin game than just the coin system of you get to take one of your actions or you get to take an event, and again, it's because of that it's probably not ideal for new players, unfortunately. What this rule book does is it does give a couple of hints. This is something most coin games didn't used to do, but I'm hoping to see more of this as to what's sort of the most expected actions that you'd be doing. There's usually a couple of actions that are really the ones you want to do, and this game actually gives you some hints towards that, if I recall correctly. That's a big deal, and especially the first time you're playing it or whatever, you're left with this, I don't know, I got all these different options, but which ones are the ones I want to do? Do I want to be mustering all the time, or do I need cash? You'll start to get the feel for what works and what doesn't, probably. But with 8 different choices between the 2 columns, it can be kind of painful. All right, let's get. And in the case of the Saxons and the Picts, raiding is one of the big actions for them, which isn't surprising, but. The Saxon gets to choose 4 different options: raid, return, march, and battle. Okay, so they actually have this pulsing, which is mentioned in here, which is raid and then return. So raid is going to drop a bunch of raiding units on the board. You pick up to 3 regions and/or cities without Saxon control, only 1 unlimited. You pay costs in order to raid the spaces. The spaces have to border Oceanus Britannicus or Germanicus, which, this is something I didn't mention. Each of the ocean spaces has a counter on it, which either says there's no patrols on it or there's naval patrols on it. And those will be modified by events, basically. Okay. Or have a Saxon warband, which is one of their cubes, and a Saxon settlement, or be adjacent to a region that has such pieces, or border a sea, which is bordering a region with such pieces. So the Saxons can always kind of raid by sea from even established locations. Now, for each space, you have to pay your choice of 1 or 2 renown for each space that you're attacking. If you pay 1 renown, you're only going to roll, I guess these are our 4-sided dice. They're 8-siders with numbers duplicated. You only get to roll 1 of those. But if you pay 2 renown, you get to roll 3. And that's going to generate a certain number of raiders. In general, you probably want to pay the higher price and create bigger raids, but you may not need that, and then it would be a waste. You roll, and you roll the dice, you add them up, and you place that many Saxon raiders there. However, if you went through a patrolled sea, for whatever reason, to get to that region, the raiders will be dropped by the number of forts, the red strongholds, that are adjacent to that sea area. Now, there was something, there's a little symbol here. I don't know what the hell that is. That little teardrop. I've seen that in a couple of spaces, but it's not in all of them, and I don't know what the fuck it means. I forgot about that, but yeah, I thought maybe that was like a port thing, but no, you're just bordering on the water. So here you'd count and you'd say, well, no, 1, 2, there's 3 bordering the Britannia. So that would be then subtracted immediately from whatever die roll you have, which means a small raid probably isn't even going to succeed. If the target space is a region rather than a city, you take and put onto Saxon units there the prosperity cubes out of the region up to the lower of the region's current population and the number of Saxon raiders. So each raider is allowed to grab one of these cubes out of the region. However, you're only allowed to steal as much as the population in any given raid. That's going to be okay. Then, and I mean, you'll have these guys there with little cubes on top of them, right? Which is a little weird, but whatever. Okay. Then you're allowed, if you wish, to pick either the Britons. Well, you're allowed to pick a faction, but the Britons and Dukes count together until fragmentation, and attack that as a group using battles. You may, I believe, throw warbands into this. If the space had Scotty control at the outset of a raid and or a Scotty settlement was destroyed, the Scotty will lose renown equal to the number of plunder cubes placed on the Saxon units from the Scotty control and or Scotty settlements. All right. Now, here's where the headers kind of get me confused. I'm here reading through this, and then I flip a page, and it's to a different command, but it sounds like it's part of this, which is return. Return is a different command you have to do. So basically, the raiders come down, they grab some gold, and then they're sitting out there on the board. Now, on the turn that they raid, in general, the defenders don't get any chance to attack them. They might get attacked by the raiders, but they might have an opportunity before that return command is done. So the return is allowing you to end the raid by pulling the raiders off the map. Otherwise, they could just kind of bumble around, and fight in battles and stuff. Not that that's terribly economical. Okay, so what you do is you remove the raiders from the map, you'll convert plunder into renown, and each of the spaces has to have a Saxon raider or a warband. In each of the spaces, you transfer the plunder into the renown, 1 for 1, and then all the raiders go back into the available box. Okay. And that is it. Okay. March. March moves the Saxon warbands, but not raiders. You pick any number of destination spaces, each adjacent to a region with a Saxon warband, or to a sea, and you pay 1 renown per destination you're going on to. 2 if you're moving by sea. For each of the selected spaces, you move the Saxon warbands from adjacent spaces into the destination space. Once per march command, Saxon warbands may move from one coastal space to another bordering the same sea. But the destination cannot have a fort. If the warbands have any plunder, they carry it with them. And then the final command available is battle. The Saxons can gain plunder and destroy enemies. You select spaces with Saxon warbands, but not just raiders, and enemy pieces. You don't have to pay for this. You have to pay to raid. You don't have to pay to return. In each battle space, first, if it's a region, not a city, that isn't Saxon controlled, you take the region's prosperity cubes up to the current population as plunder onto the war bands, up to 1 per unit. Then you select a faction for all the non-federati Saxon war bands and raiders there to fight using the battles procedure. And again, we haven't gone over the rules for battles. Each game has its own little rules, right? And they're different here. The Scotti work very much like the Saxons. They have raids that are very similar, but where they can go is a little different. They can go through Oceanus, Hibernicus, or Septentrionalius up here. These are actually probably not coming from Scotland. They're probably actually coming from Ireland, but some of them may be settled in Scotland later in the game using this directly. I don't know. Bordering Caledonia, which is up here, so they can go into one of these two spaces. Across the wall, which is probably already established groups, or have at least one Scotti warband and a Scotti settlement, or be adjacent to a region. Okay. So here, it costs 0 for the Scots to raid, and they get 1 die. Or 1, but they only get 2 dice for the extra cost. You roll, and if they're using a patrolled sea, same effects. If they go by land from Caledonia, they have to deal with a wall, which is going to be reducing the number of raiders by the total forts, I guess in these 2 areas? No, in Carvetti and Texta-Trtavova. These 2 spaces. And right now that looks like it's -2, which means raids by sea will work better right now. Same plunder, they have the option to battle. If they hit the Saxons and they destroy a settlement, the Saxons end up losing a renown equal to the cubes that were taken. The Scotti also have a return rule, which works very much the same way. They have a march rule. They can march Scottish warbands, 1 renown per destination, 2 by sea, and they can do battle. And again, it looks like it's pretty much the same. How does the battle happen? Okay, when a battle command, a Duke's intercept, a barbarian raid, or an enemy responds to a barbarian deep raid. We haven't looked at that yet. That's based on feats. Remember, the secondary thing that you can do is called a feat in this. Okay, so here's some general rules. Britain cooperation. Unless there's fragmentation, or if the battle is actually between the Dukes and the Civitates. Yeah, I'm hoping not to see a lot of that, but if they're winning, they may well, you may well see one of them try to beat up the other to try to reduce their chances of winning the game. So they are allowed to attack each other. The Duke's pieces, including the Federati, and Civitatis pieces, including the Federati, fight as a single force. Once it turns to fragmentation, though, the Duke stops being the military arm of the Roman government, and it becomes instead its own little warband group. Okay, first there's going to be a field battle, and then perhaps an assault. Given units allowed to strike only once per field battle. Okay. But defenders get to do so twice on assaults, and attackers only once. The unit's type and terrain, feats, capabilities, and other events all modify this to some extent, which step they can strike in, but that general rule of once on field battles applies, and twice for the defender in assaults. Okay, so what you do is you follow this kind of chart here. We'll talk about it in a moment. And I think there's more chart. Yeah, there's a chart here for the stronghold assaults as well. And it's largely a deterministic thing. You look at the unit type, we worry about if it's in its home terrain, but it has a strength, which is how many hits it can take and how many hits of damage it does. And these are done simultaneously, not simultaneously. But if they're in the same step, they're simultaneous. Okay. And notably, militia and raiders are halved in general, and other units are worth 1. Now, in the escalade step during an assault, let's jump over to assaults, but they have attacking raiders absorb only half losses, and 1 attacking cavalry may absorb double losses. Wait, I thought this was how many? No, yeah, it is. Okay. So attacking raiders are normally half losses. This. Gotcha. Okay. You must allocate a full loss to a unit in order to remove it. But now here we come to some rules where I feel like they're not explicit enough again. I think I read it and had some issues with it. Within a battle step, all losses that can be absorbed to remove a unit must be. It is therefore possible that the final half loss suffered in a battle is in effect ignored. I think you must maximize the losses. Now, the one exception to that has to do with cavalry and assault. If civitates and the dukes are fighting together and cannot agree on allocation of losses, each must take as close to half the total losses as possible, without more than a single unit total absorbing a loss without removal. Okay, so this is weird. Like, what kind of unit can absorb a loss without removal? I guess 1 point units taking a half hit or something, but this seems a little different from what the effect is to the other side. And with the dukes absorbing any odd losses. Okay, the terrain is going to affect these losses to some extent. So there's the concept of home terrain, and that's covered by the type of unit. So Saxons like fens. Now I can't tell what's what. Maybe those little teardrops are fens? That would make some sense. But it looks like this is a darker color and this is a lighter color, so I really don't know. I feel like I have to go look at the map rules and see if it gives me any information there. Clear fens or hills. See, they don't actually point to that, but they do here. Hills is that. Clear is this. Fens is that, and I guess it's by the color that the fens is the slightly darker region. So what does that little teardrop mean? Well, I don't know. I'm worried that I have to just ignore that. I don't like ignoring things like that, but maybe it's something that's covered in cards. One of the problems with these games is sometimes they don't spell things out, and they're only spelled out on the cards themselves. So that may be some kind of thing like there's, weeping, massive crying that happens in those sectors, and that affects a card. I don't know. Yeah, that doesn't seem likely, but okay. Hills are home terrain for the Scots pieces. Hills are home terrain for comitatus and militia once the Simbragi pivotal event, which I guess is this thing. I guess that says Simbragi. I don't know. Which gives them a capability for that. Fens and hills are considered rough terrain, which will help raiders evade. Okay, that has a reference back to stuff that we did not look at, 1.4. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. It's like availability removal and out of play. I think we're going to see. I think that reference is either wrong or not very useful. Okay. Even if not home terrain. Clear and city are not rough. Okay. Pre-battle, before a possible field battle, certain units can try to evade or ambush in order to get an early strike. Now, had we found that ambush was the thing where you got to attack twice? I don't think so. Defenders do so twice per assault. Yeah, that's not it. Okay, ambush just gives you earlier strike. Attacking, then defending factions designate their own units in the spaces desired and roll a 6-sided die for raiders and then troops. Okay. Raiders may roll either to evade or ambush. Not both. You designate before rolling which event, and all raiders in that space will get a single die roll on it. They evade on a 4 through 6 if they're in their home terrain, 5 through 6 if in other rough terrain, and only on a 6 if they're in clear terrain, which makes raiders in the clear to be kind of a risky thing because they can be attacked on after their turn, before they get to go home. Raiders in home terrain only get to ambush on a 5 through 6. Now, all warbands, federati, troops, comitatis, and militia in home terrain may also roll to evade or ambush. If they're in home terrain, they can evade on a 5 or 6, and they can ambush on a 3 through 6. Because they're a bigger force, they're more interested in attacking. It's not that the raiders wouldn't be capable of it, it's that they're not interested in it. If you evade successfully, you're not involved in the battle. Now remember, you rolled separately for the troops, for the raiders, which means you could check the raiders, see that they evaded, and then they're gone, and then check the troops and they didn't make it out, and then they might get caught where they'd rather have the raiders involved. Troops that successfully ambush all strike in the charge or ambush step of field battle, along with cavalry. Okay. So then, after you do the pre-battle roll, you check one of the following steps in order. Each unit carry out the following steps in order. I don't know. I'm very tired. Each type of unit strikes during its allocated step if and only if it has not evaded successfully, has not withdrawn in the withdrawal step, and has survived earlier steps, and hasn't struck already this turn. Trap. This happens due to an event. It allows those units to strike first. Withdrawal. Surviving defending units may withdraw within friendly strongholds in the battle space before the battle in general, trap being the only exception. They can only go in up to the holding capacity of the strongholds and assault table. So we can see here the holding capacity, a settlement will hold 2. What is a settlement? Is that? Yeah. That's the barbarian things. A hill fort will hold 2, but you go up to like a town and that holds 4, and the cities hold more than that. Now, they go in with their plunder. Before fragmentation, dukes and civitates can admit their forces into each other's strongholds. The withdrawing forces will not be involved in the field battle in any way. And if all the non-evading defenders withdraw, there won't be a field battle. And we go to the assault. Charge or ambush. Any cavalry or ambushing units strike together. In melee, this is the main remainder of the forces, except for raiders. Harass, the raiders always attack last unless they get an ambush off. I need to swap batteries. After any field battle that happened, I'm already getting my camera dirty. Then you may assault, assuming you have defeated all the defending units, or they've run away or whatever. You may then assault the faction's strongholds. If the space has multiple strongholds, you choose one to assault first, and then you can continue on to the next one if you wish. Strongholds have an intrinsic garrison during assaults, which is listed along here. And that's going to be extra forces that absorb losses. After resolving any field battle, if the defending factions have any strongholds, yeah, we're repeating ourselves here. Okay, so there's the possibility of a coup de main. I believe this requires a surprise to do it. Yeah, if the assault is part of a raider battle paired with surprise feat, you roll a 6-sided die in order to see if the coup de main succeeds. And this is where the dice come in, and you have a chance to, like, if you recall, like in Falling Sky, ambushes just happened. You had the right to do them, so everything was calculable. Here it's not. Here you've got some die rolls. You've got some variance there, and I find that refreshing. I always find the calculation aspect. I'm very much against the idea that any military operations, or economic for that matter, can be done without some degree of luck. And anything that's deterministic really starts to bother me, but that includes deterministic movement as well. So anyway, it's just combat is odder. Most war games allow deterministic movement and not combat. Okay, so anyway, the coup de main, if you roll no more than +1 above the difference between the holding capacity and the number of units actually within it. Okay, so like a town with 4 units in it, or with a holding capacity of 4, but that doesn't have any units in it, well, let's see, you add 1, what are they saying? No more than +1. So if you roll a 5 or less, you can do a coup de main. So what is the advantage of coup de main? You'll skip the escalade step and get to storm the stronghold, which means the defender only gets to swing once. But normally, assuming a coup de main can't be done, and that can only be done with surprise, all units withdrawn inside the stronghold plus the intrinsic garrison get to do a strike. They inflict losses equal to the escalade defense value, which is either half or 1, depending on how military the place is. On the assaulting units. Assaulting raiders are halved during this step for absorbing losses. They're not going to be attacking. And if assaulting units include cavalry, the Dukes is allowed to say one of those cavalry cubes can absorb double losses. I don't know how that affects some of the things. I think no matter what, they can take one of the losses on that cavalry and just prevent from losing a unit by doing that, even if they've got other stuff that could take losses. I'm a little iffy on that. Now, these aren't necessarily real cavalry. Obviously, Cav is not particularly good at assaulting cities unless they get off their horses. Then after the escalade step, you go to the storm step, where both sides get to strike simultaneously. Each unit inflicts 1 loss. There's no halving, no defense factor. And the stronghold's intrinsic garrison will take all losses first before units withdrawn do. If the intrinsic garrison and any units inside of it are completely removed and the assaulting units remain, the stronghold is destroyed. And then the attacker has the option to keep going into the next stronghold if he wants. Okay. And what's been removed? If any cavalry pieces fought and its side removed more enemy pieces than it lost, the dux gains 1 prestige. If they win a battle with cavalry. If an enemy fighting against cavalry removed more pieces than it lost, you lower prestige. And by remove, they mean did hits on you in that case. It's kind of the opposite. It's not like, oh, I removed one of my pieces. No, you remove your opponent's pieces is what they mean there. If the assault removes a fort, or before fragmentation, a town, lower prestige by 2 for each such stronghold destroyed. Prestige is something the military has. If the assault removes a stronghold, the executing faction places 2 plunder from off-board, over in here, not out of the value of the area, onto attacking units up to their holding capacity. If the stronghold was town, it's 3 plunder. If it was a city, all the city's prosperity is also taken as plunder. If the Duke's assault removes a stronghold, they get a prestige unless they're fighting the Civitades before fragmentation. If the barbarians remove more enemy pieces, including strongholds, than they lost, and they have pieces remaining, they gain a renown. If the executing faction removed any enemy pieces carrying plunder, up to half the removed plunder can be taken by their own units, or if it's the Britons, you can return the first removed plunder to the battle space as though it's prosperity, or if a barbarian in a space that it controls, it gains a renown for each removed plunder. I don't know why you would take the plunder in that case. The barbarians just kind of convert it immediately to renown, I think. That's my understanding as the value of plunder is you wouldn't want to be calling it around if you could just turn it into renown. After any battle consequences, you're allowed to besiege the strongholds in a space if all the defending units in the space have evaded, withdrawn, or been removed, or if the besieged strongholds have not been assaulted. You can't throw a siege around this stronghold if you did an assault. And you must have troops in the space equal to the holding capacity of the stronghold. Each troop counts as 1. No, each troop can only, yeah, they do, but each troop can also only count in 1 siege. If you siege, one of the pieces within that stronghold dies. If any cavalry go to casualties, and this does not affect prestige. So when cavalry die, they go in this box. They might end up going here or there from it. We have a bunch of examples. Okay, feats. Feats are, I don't know what the fuck they're called in the other one. They're the bonus things that you get to do. Over here, you can do a faction command and a feat if you're the first player, or if there's an event played, you may also use a feat as the second player. Okay. Alrighty. Some of these modify the battle, or some of them modify the command. So like surprise can affect battles and raids. But if they don't, if they're not linked to the command itself directly, you can do them either before or after the command. Okay. Sometimes the feats can have special rules to them, is basically what they're saying here. That affect that only work with specific commands. Okay, the Dux has build, invite, requisition, and retaliate. Build. They can place forts or towns by rebuilding Roman fortifications with the engineering expertise of the army, and they can add prestige. It can only accompany train or march commands. God. And occur in spaces that have cavalry more friendly. Occur in spaces that have cavalry more friendly than enemy pieces, including any raiders, and a valid stronghold site. In each selected space, you pay 3 resources, and you can either put a fort in a vacant town or hill fort site, or remove 2 militia cubes or 1 militia and a hill fort from the space and build a town there, as long as there's a vacant town space. You can make that vacant by removing the hill fort as part of the cost. Invite. This enables the Dux faction to settle barbarian federates under their command on available land, or to bribe federates away from the civitates. It may accompany train, march, or intercept, but not battle. It may occur in just one region that cannot be a city that has both a Dux peace and Britain control, and it's not allowed under fragmentation. In each selected space, you either, if it's a region, place 1 settlement of a barbarian faction, either in a vacant town or hill fort, or you replace one of your red forts in order to place up to 3 Saxon or 2 Scotty warbands of that barbarian faction, all under red federati markers. Okay, let's look at this again. Place 1 settlement of a barbarian faction from available, either in a vacant town or hill fort, or by replacing a red fort. And then, the way the wording in this is done just really gets me. It's like, it needs to be spelled out a little better. But and then you can place up to 3 or 2 war bands as well, and they'll all have your markers. Or if it's a region or city, you can pay 1 resource per piece to convert all blue federati warbands and settlements of one barbarian nation to red ones. You flip their counters. You can requisition. This enables the Dux to secure funds for its sole military use from the Britain resources. Even can be done at fragmentation. You may only accompany train, march, or battle commands, not intercept. It may occur in any spaces with at least 1 Dux piece, including red federati. For up to 6 selected spaces that have a civitatis stronghold, transfer 1 resource from blue Britain resources to red Dux resources. Once the Britain's resources reach 0, instead, you start taking their wealth at a 1-for-1. Then you convert all Dux plunder anywhere on the board to Dux resources 1-for-1. You can retaliate. Retaliation allows the Dux to strike directly at enemy renown or wealth while gaining plunder and prestige. It can accompany intercept or battle, and it occurs in just 1 space that must have an enemy stronghold. It can only target the civitates under fragmentation. It's pretty nasty stuff. In 1 battle space, the cavalry may receive and carry any plunder from destroyed strongholds. Normally they wouldn't be able to grab this, only warbands can. And if the battle removes all strongholds in that enemy in the space, you get 3 Dux prestige, and the enemy's renown or wealth is dropped by 5 total. Wealth if it's the civitates. I can't keep going. My throat's killing me. Okay, I think we're on the Civitas feats. I may be repeating myself here. So they're able to do rule, which allows them to amass wealth, reduce Duke's prestige, or increase in population under Britain control. They can only do it with muster, march, or trade, notably not battle, and up to 3 spaces with Britain control. In each space, they transfer all plunder carried by their own units into wealth, 1-for-1, and then they have the choice to either pay 2 Britain resources to add another to the wealth. So you're getting 2-for-1 with resource to wealth conversion, which is problematic because remember the Dux, when they can grab resources, they can actually dig into the wealth as well. But wealth is somewhat protected. They can't just grab it. There's ways that they can grab resources where they can't grab wealth, but there's also chances that they can grab wealth at a 1-for-1, and that's problematic there for the Britons, for the civitas. And they can also, if there's no dukes in the space, they can pay a wealth to drop the duke's prestige. This is really a, hey, the dukes is about to win, let me stop them using this, rather than militarily where we really can't. Or if a region, but not a city, with a civitas stronghold, you can pay 5 resources, discard a refugees marker that you have in your available pool. They're just wandering around all over the place. You don't have to track them on the board, and add a population to the location, which can't go higher than 1 above the printed population. Okay. You can invite, which is similar to the dukes, but you replace hill forts instead of forts, and basically you have to go read this one to make sense of it. And any federate or settlements are going to have civitats command markers on them. You can reinforce. The civitats can add friendly troops to battles from neighboring spaces or by local emergency muster. It can only accompany a battle and may occur in any battle spaces and spaces with Blue Britain control that are adjacent to a battle space. You pay 2 resources per space, and then you roll a 6-sided die. Well, you have 2 choices. You can roll a 6-sided die and move that number minus 2 Britain troops, which includes federati, and plus any cavalry and red federati, if the Dukes agrees, into the adjacent battle. This is a battle that the civitats are originating. They probably won't be doing too much of this. If the space is a battle space itself, you can muster militia there as per 3.31, which is back in their commands. Which command? Muster. You can pillage. Civitates can plunder enemy territory and damage renown and prestige. This can accompany march or battle and occur in any regions that don't have Britain control. You collect prosperity up to the region's population as plunder. Troops, each unit can only carry 1 plunder cube. And then if there's an enemy stronghold in the region, that enemy's renown or prestige can be dropped by the amount plundered. The Saxons have feats as well. Settle, surprise, ravage, and shield wall. Settle allows them to convert raiders and locals into warbands, plant settlements, and grow their population in Britain. It can only accompany the return or march commands, and it can occur in a single space where Saxon pieces, including raiders, outnumber those of all other factions. I gotta take a little break, hold on. So where are we? First, if the space is has or is adjacent to any raiders returning to port, returning as part of the accompanying command, you roll a 6-sided die for each raider. And if you roll a 4 through 6, you get a warband. Look at this game. Lots and lots of die rolling and luck in this. Very different from every other coin game that I've looked at. I'm kind of excited by that. So actually, if this is your intro to coin for some reason, which I strongly recommend you don't, several times already, it's also not going to give you a view of how deterministic almost all of coin is. There's one thing that generates a lot of randomness in coin, and that's the cards. This game, there's a lot of things where you're rolling dice for. Okay, so what do we got here? Okay, So you get warbands to settle in each space for each roll of 4 to 6, which means you're not going to lose all your raiders if you settle. You bring more warbands in instead in some cases. I mean, you do lose the raiders, but they convert. If the settle space already has a Saxon settlement, you can pay 3 renown to place 1 warband per Saxon settlement there. Plus, if it's under Saxon control at the outset of the settle feat, an extra warband per space's population. Or you can remove 3 warbands available and add a population up to the printed population plus 1. Or, if the space has an empty site, remove 2 Saxon warbands and put a Saxon settlement there. And here is one of those notes that I mentioned. This may be the only one, but it really hit me as, wow, this game actually kind of gives you a hint at what maybe you should do. Raid followed by return plus settle is the main path for placing barbarian forces onto the map. So if you have a question of how do I get my troops on the map, and maybe a lot of people do, it's fairly complicated here for the Saxons, so pointing that out may be somewhat helpful. And that may be the reasoning behind doing this. It impressed me because I'm usually very confused. What the fuck do I do in a coin game? You know, because it's not as clear as in other games with these, you know, it's very abstract, and that abstraction makes it so that it's not obvious what you're doing. It's those commands and the feat, in this case, the feats that, you know, drive all your actions and everything. It's not like, I'm going to move all these pieces and fight where I'm strong and stuff like that. That comes almost naturally in, you know, I'm not even going to say a traditional war game. I'm going to say sort of a traditional area control and conflict type game, which might be Ameritrash, it might be war games. It's very easy to grasp, and that's what this looks like, but it's not. Whereas, and no coin is. Whereas in your traditional war games, yeah, there might be some trickiness to the mechanisms used to move through the hex board and to figure out what you know, which units can attack in a specific unified atomic battle, and the CRT. And yes, I screwed that up the first war games I played, but you know, it's a very common feature to most of us that we recognize it. So I guess we kind of put out of mind what the difficulty in that concept might be. This I find harder to understand, I think, than most. Certainly than the more, what I call the more intuitive games, things like Terrible Swift Sword. Just, you know, there's this movement, and then you fire, and that, and you know, Panzer Blitz, you know, same kind of thing. Where they may be more complicated games in general, but there's something intuitive about what's going on there that's very easy to address. Here, these commands are very gamey. Okay, surprise. This is used during battle. May enable Saxons to catch enemy strongholds unaware, or to raid deep into less protected or prosperous enemy territory. It can only accompany raid or battle commands. It may only occur in one space. Okay, so if you're making an assault in the surprise space, you rolled for a coup de main, which we discussed already, a chance to take away some of the defensive advantage, or all of the defensive advantage, really. If surprise accompanies a raid command, the raid may be a deep raid. A deep raid may select a target region adjacent to a valid raid target region. The deep raid target counts as one of the allowed regions for the raid command. You have a limit to those, and is subject to any patrolled sea or event effects that would normally apply, anything through which the deep raid would pass. And in the deep raid region, if the dukes or a faction with control, if there are dukes or a faction with control, the dukes has the first action. They may free battle the Saxons before the raiders get to plunder the region. If the faction with control battled, the Saxons may not battle on their own turn. Ravaging allows the Saxons to gather plunder quickly and terrorize the local Briton population into flight. It may only accompany a raid or battle. It affects all raid and battle regions that the Saxons desire, except a raid target where no new raiders arrived. You're not able to really scare them or something. I don't know. In those raid and battle regions, plunder is not limited by the region's population, only by carrying capacity. But there's not going to be a Saxon assault in that space. In each region, after an assault is of the fortifications, you're still allowed to battle, I guess. In each region, after plunder, you roll a 6-sided die. On a 4 through 6, you reduce the population by 1 to a minimum of 0. Then, regardless of the roll, each ravaged raid region where the Saxons do not battle, the Dukes, then the Civitates, then the Scotti, each have an option to free battle against the Saxons there. This could be several battles, but no non-Saxon unit may battle more than once. So if the Britons are fighting together, they can only battle once. And the Saxons are not allowed to evade or withdraw. Okay, so what happens basically? The goal there is that you can grab perhaps more plunder, and you might reduce the population, which isn't necessarily to your advantage, because higher populations mean more opportunity for raids taking gold, and then once you capture the region, that population's yours. So you kind of don't want to do it from that point of view, but you may need that extra plunder or want it. Shield Wall. Shield Wall improves Saxon discipline in battle. It can only be used in a battle command and affects all battle spaces. During the field battles, you double the losses needed to remove Saxon warbands. They become harder to kill. Let's go over to the Scot. The Scotti. They may choose from Settle, Surprise, Ransom, and Entreat. Settle is very much like Saxon Settle, except you need a 5 through 6 to replace the raiders with warbands. Instead of 4 through 6, they're a little harder to settle, and that's kind of part. And they may not remove warbands and change them into population. Scotti Surprise is like Saxon Surprise. A Scotti Deep Raid counts as one of the 4 allowed regions on a Scotti raid. Slight differences there. Ransom. This enables the Scotti to attempt to gain renown from payments for high-ranking captives. It can accompany raid or battle and may occur in any raid or battle regions. If with a raid, some Scotti raiders must succeed in landing in the region for the ransom to occur there. The procedure is after plunder, you roll a d6 on a 4 through 6. One resource or renown comes from the faction that has a stronghold there and becomes Scotti renown. The Scotti have less pieces overall, I guess. They still have a fairly large, they still have more raiders than the Saxons. But I guess it gives them a way to get a little bit more renown so that they can keep pursuing their raids more easily. I don't know. And they can entreat. Entreating enables the Scotti to convert Civitates to Scotti. It may accompany return or battle commands and may occur in a single hills region, not any other type of terrain, that has at least one Scotti warband in it. And this is basically to convert the lowlands and the Briganti area, but has at least one Scotti warband in it. The entreat region need not have been selected for return or battle. Very interesting. You pay 4 renown to replace a hill fort in the hills region with a Scotti settlement and up to 2 militia with Scotti warbands. It might also be used, remember they operate by sea, it might be used over there in Wales as well, where they did actually go. All right, we're going to stop there because I got things to do for the day, but I got to go shopping. I'll put the marker at events. But I don't know that there's much that I have to say about events if you're used to coin games. If you're not used to coin games and you've been following along with this for some reason, here's the key thing. Remember that those feats are something you may get the opportunity to do in addition to your command. So even though some of them look pretty attractive, you have to be in a specific position, either the first player in order to do them, or if you're the second player to go, an event had to be triggered first. I'm hoping most of you have seen coin games before. If you haven't, you probably want to be looking at somebody else's rules explanation to get kind of the basic flow. Yeah, honestly, you probably want to be looking at someone else's rules explanation when it's available, because mine are not really for the normal public. Okay, let's keep pushing on. Wow, this is going to be a long video, but I don't want to break it into 2 parts. Events in this one include dual use events that have kind of a shaded section and a not shaded. You get to choose which one you have. Some of them will have this yellow little, oh, what the hell do they call it? Triskel. I think it's a Celtic symbol, but I don't remember. I looked it up because I'm like, what the fuck is that when they say Triskel? And that means that it'll last until something cancels it, basically, which might be till the end of the game. And then some of them have this little sail next to them. So here's one with the Triskel. Some of them have a sail next to them, which is a momentum, and that means it stays there until the end of the well, it says until the end of the next epic round. I'm guessing that means the epic round that's upcoming, after this series, not like, well, next Sunday. But sometimes things like that can be kind of confusing. And then it goes into some specifics, just defining stuff that's kind of similar to other games, which in the coin series, which is kind of like, well, okay, so if something's free, you don't have to pay for it, yeah. But also, whoever's making the decisions isn't necessarily the person who plays the card. It's the person who gets to do those actions. The epic cards are going to have their own events on them. Hence, we had to distinguish and put them, into early and late. And I would guess some of those late ones are really kind of game-changing things to help the deterioration of Roman Britain. The pivotal events are the player events. They can basically be, they must have any precondition met before you can play it. And then you can trump in to replace the card that's being moved into place. And it doesn't get moved into place. This one gets put into the first place location. And you can trump these trumps. They're being in order, so like the Scots one can trump any of the 3, whereas the Romano-British cannot trump, the Civites cannot trump anybody else's. So if they play, everyone else gets an option to think about whether they want to overcome it. Oh, okay. The epic rounds, and this is sort of the cleanup that happens each time one of the scoring cards comes up. First thing that's done is the Annona phase. During this, the dukes have to pay 1 resource to take a plunder marker out of the pool or whatever, and give it to each federate that they own. And yeah, like I said, that costs them a resource to give it to them. And then the civitates get to do the same thing. Doesn't say anything about using wealth for this. Once both the factions are done paying, in every region where there are war bands that don't have any plunder, all the federate from that space go native. They return back to the faction that they belong with. This can change control at that point. And all the plunder that the war bands that were already there, not the newly released ones, are added to the renown of that nation. I don't know if it's in the same area. It doesn't say. I think no matter what, any plunder that the war bands are carrying. Wait, transfer all. Oh no! Gotcha. Okay, so if you pay for them, the Federati war bands that have just been paid for return their money to the nation. So no matter what, you are actually paying the Saxons or Scotti for the use of their troops. And it turns into renown, of course. A federati settlement with no corresponding federati warbands at the outset of the annona remains federati. However, if it's released, like if you don't pay all the warbands in the area, it is released. And then the released warbands are allowed to plunder their region's prosperity up to the population. Okay. The Imperium phase is next. The Civitates may transfer Roman resources, or Britain resources, up to half the number of towns on the map into wealth. This basically lets them make their money a little bit more protected, and this is done at 1-for-1. If they're at Roman rule, and next we check the Imperium track. If you're at Roman rule and Britain control is 30 or less, or total prosperity and prestige, so total prosperity, I think, is the sum of all these. Prestige is going to be, there's got to be a prestige marker somewhere. The Duke's prestige. And if they are, let's find it, 55 or less, you shift down to autonomy without changing the dominance. So this would drop down. Britain control at the beginning of the game, there's 40 regions to be controlled, so it's pretty easy. Yeah, well, it's 11 regions to drop them, right? Nope, 10 regions to drop them. If Britain control, hello Turkey, is 20 or less, and total prosperity and prestige is 30 or less, it drops all the way to fragmentation and or total prosperity and prestige. If the above caused any shift down from Roman rule or autonomy, the prestige and wealth will both be dropped by 2. If you're at military dominance and the wealth is higher than prestige by at least 10, it switches to civilian dominance. A good reason why you want to have wealth in addition. If it's at civilian dominance and the wealth does not exceed the prestige by at least 6, it goes back to military dominance. Now, at the beginning of the game, prestige and wealth are both at 0, so it is correct at military dominance. Okay, I wasn't sure. I gotta see what they're up to. Springtimes here is always so interesting. You know, the squirrels making noises because they're fucking. Turkeys making noises. I don't know. I didn't see them looking particularly amorous. I've got a deer outside that I can't see from up here very well. I actually could. I don't know if you can see him there. Let's see. I don't know. I can see part of it, but my vision's better than through the camera, and it's hard to see. And just kind of waiting outside my yard in the park. Just neat stuff going on. Okay, let's look at the next one. So yeah, we looked at these guys. The next is the victory phase. If anyone's met their automatic victory conditions, oh birdies, the game ends now, and you determine who won and any ordering. If it's the final epoch, you do a recovery phase before you do victory. But you don't do any of the remaining things, which is kind of interesting. It means it means that you're not going to get one of the 3 final epic cards, actually, even though there's only 3 and there's 3. You're not going to get the event from it. So it's kind of equal to the first set, you get 3 out of 4. The second set, you actually get 3 out of 3, but the third one doesn't count. Okay, gotcha. And then special rules for running multiple factions in case you don't have enough players. Epic event phase, yeah, you read and take care of the event, which might shift the Imperium. Revenue phase, okay. This is going to change prestige, resources, and renown. For the Dukes, If it's military dominance, they get prestige of +5 if under Roman rule and +2 under autonomy. Under fragmentation, they get resources, not prestige. Their prestige changes, I believe it flips over. Oh no, resources is this. They get resources equal to the prosperity that's under Duke's control, not Britain control. They become their own faction, plus towns under Duke's control, plus the total number of red forts on the map. Now, towns are going to be kind of weird because towns are going to appear to be civitates owned, but we haven't looked at how you control an area. We'll get into that in a bit. I kind of skipped that. It's probably in some of the core rules. Civitates revenue, it's going to be the Blue Britain resources equal to prosperity under Blue Britain control, plus the total number of towns, or after Simbrogi, hill forts on the map. And does this just get rid of... Yeah, you don't get money from towns for after that. Imperial taxation. Under imperial rule only, you reduce the Britain resources by 30 if it's military dominance or 20 if it's civilian dominance. Down to 0, this will not affect wealth. This is going back to the imperial center, Rome itself. Saxon revenue, you add Saxon renown equal to the prosperity that the Saxons control. Scotty revenue, you add Scotty renown equal to the number of non-federati Scotty settlements on the map. Little different how they get their revenue. Then you have to pay upkeep. For the dukes, you get to stow plunder, pay resources, and redeploy cavalry and red federati. First, you remove all plunder carried by dukes and add that to the dukes' resources. Then the dukes chooses for each red fort on the map whether to pay a resource for it or remove it back to their available pool that they can rebuild. If under autonomy and the roads remain maintained, the dukes has to pay 10 resources if they want to keep the roads. Otherwise, they'll permanently disappear. The dukes relocates all cavalry to any spaces with forts. If there are no spaces with Dukes forts, the cavalry cannot move at all. It must stay put. And it's not, it's not optional normally. You do have to relocate it normally. Then the Dukes must relocate their red federati to red federati settlements of their nation, or if none are left on the map, all the red federati markers are removed. Then you put a fraction of the cavalry that's in the casualties boxes for this epic into the available forces box, and this is dependent on the Imperium statum. I think I don't remember exactly, but I think like in Roman rule, I don't remember. I know in Fragment they get them all back. They get full recovery in Roman rule and limited recovery, which I think is like, I think it's 50%. And the others go into the out of play box. You would think that would be spelled out here, but it's actually spelled out in the Imperium box rules, which we haven't gotten to yet. Civitates, they return their militia to civilian life. Some of them pay the comitates and, civitates, not comitates. They pay the comitates, they stow their plunder and redeploy civitates forces. First, they remove all the plunder from the civitates and add it to the cubes, add the value to the wealth. And then, in every space, 1 in 3 militia rounded down is removed to their available box. And then the civitates can either pay wealth for comitates or remove them. 1 wealth will pay for up to 3 comitates, and you remove any that you didn't pay for. Then they have to discard half of their refugee markers in the available forces, rounded up. Then they must relocate their militia and comitates from spaces without a town or hill fort to the nearest town or hill fort, counting by adjacency. Doesn't matter with control. If there are no town or hill forts, they can stay put. Finally, they must relocate all their blue federati to blue federati settlements of the same nation, or if none are left of that type, they remove the federati markers. So, if you can't pay your federati, or if you can pay your federati, but you don't have a place where they can withdraw to, you probably want to not pay them. Although there is a cost to that, right? They plunder or something, I think. Right? Yeah, I think they plunder the region, but that's kind of minor cost, comparatively, I guess. Okay, Saxon and Scotty upkeep. Each barbarian faction in turn sends its loot home, relocates to its settlements, and finds more renowned leaders if the prior leaders have been ineffective and thus are discredited. Each space within a Saxon unit's carrying plunder, the Saxons undertake a return command. Then the Saxons must relocate all their non-federati warbands from spaces without non-federati Saxon strongholds to the nearest such stronghold. Next, if their renown is less than 10, they set it back to 10. And finally, if the Scoti do the same thing, except their renown is reset to 6 and is limited by 6. Right? The lower bound. Okay. Recovery and reset. Before regular play resumes, some prosperity recovers, and some game functions are reset. First, in each region with any control marker, including barbarians, you add prosperity cubes equal to the population. First add to the bottom row of squares, and then if it's under Roman rule, and it doesn't matter who controls it, that could be Saxon or Scotty, you add to the top row. I find that a little weird, but yeah, that's how it's worded. No rows can hold more prosperity than the space's population. Any excess will be removed at this point. Finally, in any city with control, you add prosperity to completely fill the city. Okay. And York is smaller than London. Okay, during the recovery phase, the prosperity cubes may be added to the top row of squares within each region, only if, yeah. Okay. Reset. Discard all momentum events to the played cards pile. Shift all 4 factions' eligibility cylinders to the eligible space. Play the next card from the draw deck and reveal the draw deck's new top card. Okay. The Imperium track. Okay. Britain cooperation. Until fragmentation, dux and civitates may share resources. Their pieces within each space determine Britain control jointly. We haven't looked up control. We'll get to it. And they fight together in battles against Saxons or Scoti. Under fragmentation, though, they do not. Army preemption. Under Roman rule, at any dominance, and under autonomy with military dominance, the dux can spend Britain resources without the civitates agreeing. At autonomy with civilian dominance, the dux may only spend them if the civitates agree. During the epic round, imperial taxation is in play. We just talked about that. The road maintenance under Roman rule, it's free. Under autonomy, you have to choose to pay if you want. Dux casualties. During the epic upkeep, the Imperium states the fraction of cavalry casualties that can be returned to the available or go out of play. Under Roman rule with military dominance and under fragmentation, all casualties go to available. Okay, I was a little wrong there. Under Roman rule with civilian dominance, 2/3 of the casualties go to available. The rest go to out of play, and that's rounded down. Under autonomy, 1/2 of casualties go to available. The balance is out of play. During the epic round recovery, Roman rule allows the addition of prosperity cubes to regions' bottom and top rows of squares. And Imperium status can affect dux and civitates victory conditions. It affects their victory thresholds, and dominance is necessary for victory, except if fragmentation is in play, where there is no dominance. Also under fragmentation, Duk's victory depends on Duk's control rather than total prosperity, and Saxon victory depends on control alone. Mark the Dukes and Civitatis thresholds that apply at the current Imperium with red and blue pawns, and we have those right now along the edge of the track. Okay, let's see what we got. Each faction has its own victory conditions. Whenever a non-player faction passes a victory check, well, that's not going to happen. All players lose equally. Otherwise, if a player wins or an automatic victory, or nobody does by the end of the game, the faction with the highest victory margin comes in first place, second highest comes in second, and so on. Exceeding the victory threshold, and this is important because for people who like to who like to say something like, well, maybe the non-players won, but I came in higher than you. They have no bragging rights for that, is basically what it's negating. I think that would. I think that would. I feel like there's some possible issues with that, but I don't know. I mean, if you got beaten by the bots, you should look at it as a loss, but I don't know if it doesn't make sense to play for second or third in that case anyway, if you know you're going to get beaten by a bot. But this says, hey, the bots, their victory just trumps everyone. If you manage to lose to a bot, the players have screwed up. Exceeding victory threshold. Okay. You check in each victory phase, and you compare the totals to the thresholds noted on the faction foldouts along with the game's board track and below. The Dukes get points equal to the sum of their current prestige plus either prosperity, no matter who controls it, or if it's fragmentation, the sum of prestige plus population under Duk's control. Before fragmentation, the Dukes has to beat 75 at Roman rule or 60 at autonomy. And we're up at the 75 space right there. And they must hold military dominance before fragmentation. Once they're in fragmentation, they win if the population under red Duk's control plus prestige exceeds 17. The Civitatis score is equal to their population currently under blue control. Before fragmentation, they win if the Britain control exceeds 36 at Roman rule or 27 at autonomy, and they hold civilian dominance. Once fragmentation happens, they win if Britain control, population currently under blue, not red control, exceeds 16. Okay. The Saxons, before fragmentation, win if their renown exceeds 30 and they have at least 4 Saxon settlements, which can include Federati, on the map. It does, regardless of Imperium, they can also win if they ever get their population up to 10 under Saxon control. The Scotti win, regardless of Imperium, if Scotti renown exceeds 45 and at least 4 Scotti settlements, including Scotti Federati, are on the map. Okay. And during the final epic round, if play reaches the victory phase of the final epic round, and no faction gets an automatic victory, then you do a recovery phase, unless it's at fragmentation, and then the faction with the highest victory margin wins. A victory margin is the amount a faction is beyond or short of its condition. For the Dukes, prosperity plus prestige minus 75 at Roman rule. And I mean, basically, you're taking these victory conditions and subtracting the expected value, and that's going to be your difference. But, let's see. So there's a penalty for civilian dominance of 10 points in that, or minus 60 with autonomy or military dominance. minus 70 at autonomy with civilian, or Dux control plus prestige minus 17. So yeah, the Saxons, the higher of Saxon renown, minus 50, plus 5 per Saxon settlement on the map, if there's no fragmentation, or Saxon control, minus 10. That should probably be Saxon population under control, etc. Okay, how do we get control? That was in the ones and we skipped it. I think like around 1.6 or something. Yeah. A faction controls a region if it has a stronghold there. This is important. And there is a troop, and its troop and stronghold pieces outnumber those of all other factions combined. Federati pieces count for their employer, not for this nationality that they're part of. Raiders never count for or affect control, but they can affect commands and feat actions. A faction controls a city if it has a stronghold there, regardless of anything else. Now, except under fragmentation, civitates and dukes, including their federati, add together to determine Britain control. And Britain control is friendly to the dukes, as well as the civitates, of course. Under fragmentation, Britain control means control by the civitates faction, and the dukes control is assessed separately. This is the important thing, though. You must have some form of stronghold, which can be a town or whatever, in a space to control it. And, of course, the raider pieces are ignored for control. So you can see some significant differences in this from other coin games. One of them, the one that kind of impressed me the most, was that in the extensive designer's notes, both the designer and Volko were kind of holding a conversation that showed up in GMT's House Organ magazine. And they republished that entire conversation over several, issues into the designer's notes for this. And in there, they kind of talked about a few things. One of which is, this is not a coin. This is not a counterintelligence situation. And I remember some people at one point or another kind of questioned, fairly early on in coin, and some who were fairly, established coin people, including maybe designers, I'm pretty sure, in the series, saying things like, no, you can't do this. That's not counterintelligence. The name coin means something. I'm glad to see that this and Falling Sky, and to a lesser extent the American Revolution, Liberty or Death, are covered, and you could say that's kind of a counterinsurgency. Yeah, but it's kind of not too. There's some significant reasons you could argue that it's not entirely counterinsurgency. The regular army in that is a little bit more effective than it is in most of the counterinsurgencies. But that basically you can't extend this to just about anything. And there, in the designer's notes, they went in a different direction, which is necessary for, saying that this game should be published at all, and maybe almost even more so maybe with Falling Sky. I feel like that's even less of a counterinsurgency. This one doesn't feel like counterinsurgency, but it has some real similarities with it due to the large time frame of the operations that are taking place. It does feel a little bit more like it. But the argument that the designer and developer made is that, look, GMT has decided to expand the coin series to non-modern, non-counterinsurgencies because the system works well as long as there's asymmetric capabilities. And I would say the system probably works well even if there isn't, but you're paying a lot of overhead for this design, with these cards coming up and with all these specific things. If these things are all the same for all the factions, you're looking at something very different. But honestly, I think almost any form of war has some degree of asymmetry in terms of what the different powers can do. And you could probably shoehorn a lot more into the coin series in a reasonable and in a fashion that makes sense to use this design in a lot of ways. You could actually probably use non-military designs. I could see games that are focused more, on political action and stuff like that, that maybe use this kind of system where, I don't know, you're looking at, trying to sway the government through non-violent means entirely. And I don't know how Gandhi works, but that may be an aim in that direction. So it's kind of exciting to me. The problem, of course, is, for me, most of the coin games feel a little too similar. Although I have to say Falling Sky felt less similar than the rest, and even though I feel like the deterministic combat doesn't work there, I'm looking at this one with a little bit of anticipation, because I don't believe that the deterministic combat is going to be as big a problem in this one. And I'm very, very intrigued to see how this works. It's got a lot more moving pieces than some of the coin games, though. So, again, the warning that I keep repeating: don't make this your first one. If you got this for the subject matter, and you want to look at that, okay, that's great, and give it your try or whatever. But don't walk away discouraged because you don't understand what the fuck's going on and you don't get anything about it. Think about getting or playing another coin game with someone else, one of the simpler ones. I would suggest Andean Abyss, but that's because I haven't looked at Cuba Libre yet. Cuba Libre, I think, is supposed to be the simplest of them all, but I'm not sure. Without having played it, I don't know. But yeah, Andean Abyss really felt like it's the first one, and it's written without, really trying to get that idea across of the design. Now, they all of them try to write the core rules of, the cards and everything. There's not a lot of assumptions being made there. They're all kind of ready for someone to pick them up immediately as the first game, but I would hold off on buying this one until you at least get a try to the system and get some familiarity with how that works. I think it's a little bit more complex to kind of get into the mindset of playing one of these, between the cards and your different capabilities, and being aware of all of them, being aware of trying to balance victory conditions and keep somebody from winning, which is very much like Here I Stand, of course. And I don't know, I assume it works the same in this one as it does in all the others I've seen, where, you basically, you can't easily win because it's not that hard to stop people from accumulating their automatic victory conditions, if you're trying to do that. If you're not trying to do that, well... As far as I'm concerned, there's not enough luck in the game for you to expect to fall into a victory by not trying to prevent other people from winning. Anyway, nice long intro, Jesus, and let's send it up.